The final notice from the bank arrived, a hostile red against the cold, silent workshop. Isaac Garrison, blind since childhood, felt its weight more keenly than any sound. 30 days. That was all he had left before the world, with its apps and digital tuners, finally silenced his life's work and his only home. The cold was a physical presence in the workshop, a predator that had slipped through the cracks in the old window frames and now stalked the corners of the room. Isaac Garrison, at 58, felt it not in his bones, but in the stiff, reluctant response of the aged wood and in the very air around him. Blind since a fever stole his sight at age 7, his world was one of texture and sound, and today, the silence was as sharp as the chill. His small business, Garrison's Piano Forte, nestled in the forgotten heart of Oakhaven, a town slowly rusting away like the abandoned factories at its edge, was dying. His fingers, gnarled from decades of wrestling with taut wires and stubborn pins, traced the rim of a cold, empty mug. On the workbench beside it lay a stack of unopened envelopes, all of them a hostile shade of red. He didn't need to see them to know their contents. He could feel their collective weight, a pressure in the air. One, however, felt different. It had arrived yesterday, its paper thicker, more official. His screen reader had recited its contents in a flat, robotic voice that offered no comfort. A final notice from the bank. 30 days. 30 days before the foreclosure proceedings would begin on the workshop, the only home he had ever truly known, inherited from his mentor a lifetime ago. The space was his sanctuary, a museum of a dying art. The air smelled of shellac, old spruce, and the faint, metallic tang of tuning forks. His tools, many of them custom-made by his own hands, lay in their designated spots, their worn wooden handles smooth from his touch. They were extensions of his senses, allowing him to perceive the secret soul of a piano, to feel the dissonance in a string like a fever in a child. But the world no longer had much use for souls. It had apps now, digital tuners that promised sterile perfection with a few taps on a screen. Electronic keyboards, which never went out of tune, filled living rooms where uprights once stood. The phone on the wall, a rotary model he kept for its familiar feel, hadn't rung with a new client in over 2 months. The silence was the sound of his obsolescence, a slow, cold fade to black. The jarring ring of the rotary phone sliced through the quiet, making Isaac jump. He fumbled for the receiver, his heart giving a hopeful, foolish leap. Maybe a referral, a last-minute reprieve. Isaac, it's Pastor Miller from St. Jude's. The hope deflated, replaced by a quiet affection. Pastor, good to hear your voice. Is it that time again? The old girl getting a bit sharp in her upper register. There was a pause on the other end. Heavy with an apology Isaac could feel even across the wire. Well, that's what I'm calling about, my friend, the pastor began, his voice strained. Isaac, I'm so sorry to do this, but the church is in a tight spot. Donations have been down for months. We can't afford the tuning this quarter. I hope you understand. Each word landed like a small, perfectly weighted stone on the already cracking ice of Isaac's finances. The $85 from St. Jude's wasn't much, but it was reliable. It was grocery money. More than that, it was a connection. He had rescued that particular upright piano, a dusty, forgotten 1920s Baldwin, from a church basement sale 15 years ago. He'd spent a week of his own time coaxing it back to life, replacing its brittle hammers, restringing its core. It was his donation to the community, and its quarterly tuning was a ritual, a visit to an old friend. He leaned against the workbench, the bank's final notice feeling like a brand against his back. The sensible part of his brain, the part screaming about survival, urged him to politely decline, to explain his own dire situation. It was the only logical thing to do. But logic had little to do with the art of bringing harmony from chaos. He thought of the small congregation, of the hymns that would sound just a little more weary, a little more broken, without his touch. He thought of the piano itself, its unique voice, and the quiet promise he'd made to it long ago. A long moment passed. Finally, Isaac cleared his throat. "Don't you worry about it, Pastor," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "Some voices, you can't let them go out of tune. It's important." He could almost hear the pastor's sigh of relief. "I'll be by on Wednesday afternoon. No charge." "Isaac, I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm offering," Isaac replied, a sense of calm settling over him. It was an irrational, self-destructive decision. But in that moment, as he stood in his silent, freezing workshop with the wolves of foreclosure at the door, preserving one small piece of beauty in the world felt like the only act of defiance he had left. It was an assertion of his own value, a testament to a craft that was about more than just money. It was about respect. Wednesday afternoon sunlight, thin and pale, filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Jude's, casting muted jewels of color across the empty pews. The church was a cavern of stillness, a stark contrast to the storm in Isaac's mind. Here there was only him and the old Baldwin. He ran his hand over its familiar nicks and scars, a greeting between old companions. This wasn't just a job, it was a communion. He worked methodically, his movements a fluid dance of practiced muscle memory. He'd start with the A above middle C, striking the key, listening to the pure, unwavering tone of his tuning fork, then gently turning the pin with his lever. He didn't just listen for the pitch. He listened for the quality of the sound, the bloom, the decay, the overtones. He felt the subtle resistance of the pin, the vibration traveling up the lever into his arm, telling him everything he needed to know. He was a doctor tending to a patient, diagnosing and healing one string at a time. An hour later, the work was done. The piano felt alive under his hands, its voice clear and resonant, ready for Sunday's hymns. But Isaac didn't pack his tools. In the profound silence of the empty sanctuary, an impulse he hadn't indulged in years took hold. He let his fingers drift across the keys, and from a place of deep memory, a melody began to surface. It was a piece he'd composed in his head long ago, a tune he called First Light. It was his attempt to capture the last thing he truly remembered seeing. The hazy, golden light of dawn filtering through his childhood bedroom window just before the fever took his world. The music was a tapestry of sensation, the gentle ache of loss woven with the stubborn warmth of a cherished memory, a quiet narrative of a hope that refused to be extinguished. Unseen in the very back pew sat Layla Miller, the pastor's 17-year-old daughter. She was hiding, nursing a fresh wave of teenage fury after a fight with her best friend. She'd been mindlessly scrolling through her phone, the glow of the screen a small, private rebellion in the hallowed space. But the music cut through her anger, silencing the noise in her head. It was unlike anything she'd ever heard on the radio or on her playlists. It was so real. It was sad, but it wasn't depressing. It was like listening to someone's soul. She looked up, her eyes focusing on the solitary figure at the piano. She saw the way his body swayed with the melody, his head tilted as if listening to a secret conversation. She saw the focused grace of his hands on the keys. This wasn't just a repairman, this was an artist. On instinct, she lifted her phone, tapped the record button and held it steady. She captured the final, soaring moments of the piece, the last, hopeful chord hanging in the sun-dusted air long after his hands had fallen still. Layla watched as Isaac slowly packed his tools, the spell of the music still lingering in the air. A profound sense of injustice settled over her. Her dad had told her about Mr. Garrison's struggles, how his business was failing. It felt fundamentally wrong that someone who could create something so beautiful was on the verge of losing everything. That melody, that moment of pure, unguarded artistry, it deserved to be heard. That evening, sitting in her room, she rewatched the video. The shaky camera work didn't matter. The power was in the raw honesty of the scene. The humble church, the old piano, and the blind man pouring his heart out for an audience of none. She logged into her Reddit account, navigated to the R Made Me Smile subreddit, a place for moments of uplifting humanity, and uploaded the clip. She hesitated over the title, wanting to get it just right. Finally, she typed, Our community's blind piano tuner is about to go out of business, but he still came to tune our church's piano for free today. This is what he played for himself when he thought no one was listening. She posted it and went to bed, not thinking much more of it. The next morning, Isaac was jolted awake not by his alarm, but by a sound he hadn't heard in years. The incessant pinging of his ancient smartphone. It was a cheap, outdated model, but its screen-reading function was his lifeline. Now, it was in a frenzy, reading out a torrent of notifications he couldn't comprehend. Upvoted your post on R made me smile, commented on your post, user 48,151,623, awarded you the wholesome seal of approval. It was a meaningless, overwhelming flood of digital noise. Then the rotary phone rang, its shrill cry cutting through the electronic chatter. It was Pastor Miller, his voice crackling with an energy Isaac had never heard from him. Isaac. My God, Isaac, have you seen it? Seen what? My phone is making a racket. I think it might be broken. No, it's not broken. It's Layla. She posted a video of you on a website called Reddit. Isaac, it's gone viral. That's what they call it. Viral. The pastor tried to explain the concepts of upvotes, subreddits, and internet fame, but the words were a foreign language to Isaac. There are thousands of comments, people from all over the world. They're calling you a genius, a hero. 1 million people, Isaac. 1 million people have seen you play. Isaac sank onto the edge of his bed, the phone receiver cold against his ear. 1 million people. He felt a wave of dizziness, a strange mix of confusion and a primal, terrifying exposure. He had played that piece for himself in what he thought was a sacred, private space. Now, that intimate moment had been broadcast to a faceless crowd, and he felt like a man who had suddenly found himself naked in the middle of a stadium. Miles away, in a quiet, sun-drenched home overlooking a placid Vermont lake, Eleanor Vance scrolled through her morning news feed. At 72, the former concert pianist moved with a pained stiffness that belied the fiery passion still residing within her. Crippling arthritis in her hands had prematurely ended her celebrated career on the stage 2 decades ago, replacing the roar of the crowd with the quiet lapping of water against the shore. She rarely clicked on the viral videos her niece sent her, but the headline about the blind piano tuner caught her eye. It was a sweet story, a small act of kindness. She tapped play, listening idly through her laptop speakers. The melody was lovely, poignant, but then something made her sit up straight. It was the sound of the piano itself. It was an old upright, she could tell, the kind that often sounded tinny or muffled. But this one sang. It had a warmth, a perfectly balanced resonance that was astonishingly difficult to achieve, even on the finest instruments. Intrigued, she reached for her professional-grade headphones, the ones she used when she wanted to truly listen. She played the video again. This time, she heard it all. She heard the flawless intonation, the purity of the unisons, the clean, shimmering decay of the chords. This wasn't just a competent tuning, it was mastery. It was the work of someone who didn't just hear pitch, but understood the very physics of sound, who could manipulate the subtle tensions of the soundboard and strings to create a cohesive, vibrant whole. It was the work of an artist. And then there was the music itself, First Light. Beneath its simple, elegant structure, she heard a sophisticated compositional mind at work. It had a narrative, a soul. It was the kind of raw, unpolished talent she had spent her life searching for, both in herself and in her students. A profound sense of connection washed over Eleanor. She, a virtuoso silenced by a failing body. He, a master craftsman silenced by a changing world. They were two sides of the same coin, two souls devoted to the same wooden, wired heart. She felt the sting of his predicament as if it were her own, the quiet tragedy of a brilliant talent being overlooked, of a lifetime of dedication being rendered obsolete. This wasn't just a man who needed a handout. This was a talent that needed to be preserved. She would not let it fade away. With a resolve she hadn't felt in years, she picked up her phone. Her performing days were over, but her influence was not. She started with a simple search. St. Jude's Community Church, Oak Haven. The days following the video felt like a surreal dream to Isaac. Pastor Miller had helped him navigate the flood of goodwill. A GoFundMe page had been set up by a well-meaning Redditor, and donations were pouring in. Calls came from local news stations. People in Oak Haven who hadn't spoken to him in years would stop him on the street, patting his shoulder and telling him they'd seen him on the internet. It was all kind, but it was also deeply unsettling. He was grateful, but he felt like a charity case, an object of pity. With a quiet firmness that surprised even himself, he asked the pastor to have the donation page taken down. "My hands still work," he had explained. "I just need work for them to do." He sat in his workshop, the foreclosure notice a constant, cold pressure in his mind, when the phone rang again. He expected another reporter, but the voice on the other end was different. It was a woman's voice, clear and elegant, with an authority that commanded attention. "Am I speaking with Mr. Isaac Garrison?" "You are. My name is Eleanor Vance. I saw a video of you online, Mr. Garrison, the one in the church." Isaac braced himself for another wave of well-intentioned sympathy. "Yes, ma'am, it's been quite a thing. I'm not calling about the video," she said, her tone shifting from polite to professional. "I'm calling about the sound. You achieved a color and a balance on that old Baldwin that I haven't heard in years. I am a pianist, and I have a piano that needs you." Isaac straightened up. This was new. "What kind of piano?" "A 1928 Steinway Model D, a concert grand," she said. "It's in my home in Vermont. It has been neglected. It hasn't been properly serviced by a true craftsman in 20 years. I would like to commission you to come and restore its voice." Isaac's breath caught in his throat. A vintage Steinway D. It was the Stradivarius of the piano world. The opportunity to work on such an instrument was a dream he had long since abandoned. "Ma'am, Miss Vance, Vermont is a long way. The cost is not a concern," Eleanor stated, cutting him off gently. "Your skill is rare, Mr. Garrison, and it commands a premium. I will, of course, cover all your travel and lodging in addition to your fee. In fact," she continued, a deliberate warmth entering her voice, "I would like to place you on a retainer, a consulting retainer. I have a feeling I will need your expertise on an ongoing basis, and I want to ensure your availability. I'll have my bank wire an initial payment to you immediately." She named a figure. Isaac's mind went blank. It wasn't just a number. It was a specific, impossible, life-altering sum. It was enough to pay off the entire remaining balance on his workshop's mortgage. It was enough to cover the property taxes for the next 5 years. It was enough to fix the heating. "A retainer," he stammered, the word feeling foreign in his mouth. "Yes," Eleanor affirmed, her voice full of conviction. "For your mastery. I'm not buying your time, Mr. Garrison. I am investing in your art." He stood there, gripping the cold plastic of the receiver, the silence of his workshop pressing in on him. For 30 years, he had fought to keep his head above water, to preserve his dignity, to honor his craft in a world that had forgotten it. And now, a stranger from 1,000 miles away was offering him not charity, but recognition. She wasn't pitying his blindness or his poverty. She was honoring his gift. The decades of quiet struggle, of stoic resilience, finally gave way. A single hot tear traced a path through the dust on his cheek, then another. He lowered his head, unable to speak, and simply nodded, a silent, profound thank you to a woman he had never met. 6 months later, the sign above the workshop door was new, its freshly painted letters gleaming in the autumn sun. Garrison Piano Restoration. The predatory cold was gone, replaced by the gentle hum of a new heating system. Inside, the space was transformed. The clutter was organized, the lighting was warm, and in the center of the room stood a magnificent, half-restored 1890s Bechstein Grand, an instrument most would have declared unsalvageable, sent to him by a collector in Chicago. Eleanor Vance's retainer had been more than a lifeline. It had been a key. It unlocked the door not just to financial stability, but to a new world. After his transformative week in Vermont, where he and Alina had spent hours talking not just about pianos but about music, life, and the nature of art. She had become his patron and his fiercest advocate. With her funding and guidance, a professional website was built, showcasing his work and philosophy. The story that had started on Reddit was now retold, not as a tale of pity, but as a discovery of a hidden master. The commissions that followed were no longer for $85 church tunings, but for significant restoration, projects from clients across the country who sought out his unique, intuitive touch. The final scene of this new chapter unfolded on a bright Tuesday afternoon. The scent of lemon oil and warm wood filled the workshop. Isaac was not alone. He stood beside a 14-year-old boy named Leo, whose sightless eyes were wide with concentration. Isaac gently guided the boy's small hand to the felt of a piano hammer. "Feel that, Leo?" Isaac's voice was patient, kind. "That tiny indentation, that's where the string has compacted the felt. It's like a little callus. You have to gently reshape it, bring the life back to it. You don't see it with your eyes. You see it with your fingers." Leo was his first student, a quiet boy from a town 2 counties over, whose parents had read about Isaac and had driven him here, full of hope. Isaac was teaching him not just a trade but a language, a way of understanding the world through touch and sound. Across the workshop, Layla Miller sat at a new desk, a laptop open in front of her. She was now his part-time apprentice and administrative assistant, expertly managing the scheduling emails that flowed in from Boston, Seattle, and Austin. She'd look up from the screen occasionally, a smile playing on her lips as she watched Isaac and Leo, their heads bent together in shared focus. The simple video she had posted had not just saved a man's business. It had sparked a legacy. In the quiet of the workshop, two melodies intertwined. One was the steady, confident hum of a master's work, the other the hesitant, questioning notes of a new beginning. Together they formed a harmony, a timeless, resonant chord of hope, passed from one generation to the next, a sound that would never, ever go out of tune.